Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, at the end of last week, we got a spectacular view of this powerful thunderstorm that was near Calgary in Alberta, Canada. And this was probably my favorite of all the images that were released of this storm because I think it's the only one that didn't have a bunch of filters applied to it. But it just shows you how incredibly powerful weather is as an expression in our atmosphere here. Now, speaking of powerful weather events, we did see at the end of last week a massive complex of thunderstorms that raced out of the Dakotas through Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP. And one thing I want to show you about this complex of thunderstorms that went through that area was right here, when you look at the anvil, that's that top flat cloud that sits on the top of these thunderstorms. Well, it extended to cover almost the entirety of Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, parts of Lake Superior here up into Canada, which meant the thunderstorm that was producing this was likely producing a lot of severe weather. And we certainly saw that in the reports back on the 17th, with over 200 reports of severe weather, a lot of which coming from strong straight-line winds and hail back in North Dakota. As we progressed our way into the day on the 18th, we continued to see that thunderstorm complex hit parts of the Great Lakes states. But outside of that, North Carolina spent the weekend, and parts of Virginia too, with some strong straight-line winds that moved through parts of that region of the Carolinas here. As we worked our way into the Sunday time frame, this was kind of midday Sunday through early this morning, we saw a couple of thunderstorm complexes that we need to take note of. First of all, storms moved through parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, bringing some desperately needed rainfall. And even early this morning, a second round of that rainfall moved through parts of southeastern Illinois over into Indiana. Meanwhile, you can see the southwestern monsoon cranking up down here in the Four Corners states, and also a complex of storms that moved out of parts of Wyoming right here into Nebraska. Still raining this morning in Nebraska, but this left a tail of destruction here with some big hail that came out of parts of Wyoming into far western Nebraska. You can see that on the storm reports here for the 19th. A lot of severe wind reports in this section of the United States, and then right here you can see that complex of storms really putting down some very, very large hail. Now, when you put it all together, total accumulated precipitation through 4 a.m. this morning over the last 72 hours, we can see the influence of the monsoon. We can see the storms up here in parts of the northern plains getting into the Great Lakes states. You can see the critical rains that came through parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and also back into parts of Missouri, Kansas, and some of those strong storms that had raced through parts of Wyoming into Nebraska. Due to higher atmospheric pressure sitting over much of the southern region of the United States, a lot of this area did not get much precipitation over the weekend, just a few hit or miss thunderstorms here. And until that high pressure cell moves, that's going to be the name of the game. But you can see the scattered nature of the storms over here in North Carolina, some of which producing some strong straight line winds, as did some storms that went through this part of New York and Pennsylvania. Saw some damage reports there, a lot of large trees uprooted. So keeping this in the back of our minds, I want to do a quick analysis here looking back at the growing season so far. So this map shows total accumulated precipitation from May 1st through July the 18th. And I realize the numbers on the bottom here are kind of small, but I want to show you something. If you're getting above this color right here, we're talking about at least 7 inches of precipitation since May the 1st. And you can pause the video and take a closer look at it here. But what I'm looking for are regions that are stressed for water, that have not had enough. So what I'm about to do is remove everything that is above 5 inches. So what we're left with on this map here is May 1st through July 18th, showing you areas that have received less than 5 inches. And there are some areas that really stand out. One area we're going to be watching closely this week will be how much rain gets into this section of Iowa. But dotted in parts of North Dakota, into Minnesota, even over into Pennsylvania, we do have some places east of the 100th meridian that are still very dry. Now you get into the high plains in the western plains of the United States, things have been exceptionally dry in places. And over the weekend I saw a very interesting picture right here in this part of Colorado, right along I-70 in a town called Flagler, where some dryland corn, well, this is what happens when it gets less than 2 inches of rainfall during a whole growing season. So pretty amazing to see that. But thinking about what's going on with precipitation, let's add in a temperature component to this. So the map you're now looking at shows total accumulated growing degree day units from April 1st all the way through the 18th of July. Pause the video, take a look at your region. I've overlaid the numbers there so you can see what the numbers look like. But I wanted to analyze this in a couple of different ways. So the first way is by showing you over that same time period growing degree day unit anomalies. We can see that parts of the southeast and the mid-south, there are a few places that are sitting in deficit compared to normal. We haven't really seen too much extreme heat in this section of the United States right over here. And in parts of the Pacific Northwest and Montana, we're sitting in deficit in terms of growing degree day units. But certainly between the two, stretching all the way from the Four Corner States to the Great Lakes and into the Northeast, we have seen a surplus of these GD units. Now, I know I have a lot of folks that watch this video that grow a lot of corn, so I want to address a particular number for corn, the number 2,500. 2,500 GDUs is typically what we need to get a crop to maturity. So the map you're looking at right here shows you the percent of 2,500 GDUs we've accumulated so far this year. Now, everywhere that you see white, we've already exceeded 2,500 GDUs. But for example, look at right here where I live, 67%. Okay, so 67% of the way to finishing this crop. Now, as you look at this map, you might be going, well, wait a second, why is the Central Valley of California not showing up with already having more than 2,500 GDUs? Well, it all comes in the way that the growing degree day unit is calculated. You see, anything above 86 degrees Fahrenheit is ignored. We see that the corn tend to be stressed above those numbers. So while it's been hot in the Central Valley of California, we see that stress coming up in this particular map. So again, this is from that research from Elwyn Taylor. I showed it to you last week. It's looking at accumulated stress degree days. So it's anything counted above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. What we're concerned about, according to his research, is during a growing season for dryland corn, anything above 140 units would be considered stressful on the crop. So when I show you this, I make everything less than 140 in green, and I overlay the numbers. You can see how hot the southern plains of the United States have been, stretching up into parts of western Nebraska and eastern Colorado, where you saw that damaged corn just a few moments ago. Now today the heat is out east. We have the heat advisory stretching from parts of South Carolina clear up to Maine, while the midsection of the country has some cooler days to start off this week. We have air quality issues that are in this part of California due to some fires that have broken out there over the last week and put a lot of smoke into the atmosphere. Now early this morning we were watching the remnants of some storms move through parts of Nebraska and the tail end of them all the way down into parts of the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. And yet again, some nice precipitation that moved through parts of Indiana over some very dry fields here and also parts of southeastern Illinois. The back end of this comes all the way up into Montana, where we're still watching a shortwave that will move through this area and give us a chance for some severe weather later on today that will be in parts of the Dakotas right in through here. So there's a lingering frontal boundary sitting in this area and a shortwave coming out of Montana that's going to ignite storms later on today in this section of the Dakotas. Now in the two following days, which are the next two maps across the top, so much of the United States is kind of going to be susceptible to thunderstorm activity. But over the southeast, while we could see some pop-up storms, the air is going to be very stagnant, not much movement at all. Very, very humid days coming up, pop-up thunderstorms, but just, well, given the fact that it's an upper level ridge over that area, just not a whole lot moving around here. So I want to show you the precipitation coming up in from four different sources, so 4 different ways. The first animation is from our high-resolution NAM model. And as we play this forward, what we're going to do is we're going to step back and show you the boundaries we're watching most carefully. So this is now getting into the early morning hours, so models did a pretty good job at picking up on where the precipitation was going to be. So you can see lined up pretty well here. As we progress through the day today, this is Monday through midday. Now getting into the afternoon hours, can you see how just so much of the atmosphere is ready to pop with thunderstorms due to the heat and humidity? But what I'm going to be watching most carefully is the shortwave coming out of Montana and out ahead of it producing strong to severe storms late this afternoon and this evening, pulling through this part of North and South Dakota. Now to its south, it's meeting up with a frontal boundary draped right in through this area, and in the overnight hours, this will be what will be critical. The models are trying to produce in the overnight hours precipitation from Kansas into eastern Nebraska, and they want to produce rainfall that comes right through the driest fields here in Iowa, which I showed you a few moments ago. Now, if the model has got this pinned down and that wave does meet up with the weak frontal boundary, these would be absolutely critical rains for this section of Iowa, something we've been watching form, going back to midweek last week. Those storms then eventually push through parts of the central Corn Belt, and again, we see in the afternoon on Tuesday here, storms just popping on the southwest monsoon, on the heat and humidity of the day, and where that frontal boundary still lingers. So this is from the NAM model through Tuesday evening. Let's now look at it from the National Weather Service. Now they blend several different model products together to give you this. And this is from the Weather Prediction Center, which is a part of the National Weather Service. So down here in the south, getting over into parts of Texas, just hit or miss storms. Where the lingering frontal boundary sits right in through here, we see much better chances of rainfall. But a lot of attention we put right here on this area in which you've seen some drier fields lately, especially in parts of Iowa, as to whether or not we will actually be getting the rainfall in this area. Now, over the weekend, we saw it trend down. We saw it trend drier, and then it just recently, last night's model runs bumped back up again. I'll also talk in a few moments about what's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico here that could bring some much-needed rainfall into this section of Texas. All the while, southwestern monsoon's been going, and the northern plains getting to the Great Lakes states looks wet as well, as does parts of the northeast, which is good for some drought-stricken area there. So this is the second way. Let's now go to our third analysis. The European model has given this particular area the best chances of rainfall out of all the models. Still sees the storms to the north, sees the tropical impulse that's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico toward this part of Texas. But what I want to show you is I want to compare the European to what the GFS says. So you got the European here. Here's the GFS. You see, the GFS lets that frontal boundary linger farther to the south, and as a result, parts of Iowa, Illinois, getting over the northern half of Indiana and Ohio look much drier in through this area. Other pieces look quite similar compared to the European, including what's coming out of the tropics and what we've got here in the northern plains getting into the northern Minnesota and Wisconsin. But overall, it's going to be how far to the south does that frontal boundary actually make it. Now, speaking of the tropics, the National Hurricane Center has given this a 20% chance of developing into a tropical depression or stronger. We're also watching another wave over here that is down into the main development region that we need to keep an eye on over the coming days. So what's going to be happening? I think a lot of the story is going to be told in the upper level winds. Remember, the jet stream is still pretty far to the north, and we're going to watch this shortwave right here come through and give us our best chances of severe weather in this area. But higher atmospheric pressure is still lingering in this particular spot of the United States, so it will be on the northern edge of that where that boundary sits. Now, how far to the north it goes will be critical for what's going to happen in parts of Iowa and Nebraska, then, of course, over into Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio as the time progresses. Because by the end of the week, look at what we get. You see the jet stream comes into a pattern that once again sends it way far to the north, like that. And we see this large region of higher atmospheric pressure in the upper levels of the atmosphere producing a sizable ridge that's going to be bringing in some heat and some drier conditions to much of the middle part of the United States toward the end of this weekend. It doesn't look to be stuck, but it's just another round of very high heat. So let's watch our European model to see how this all plays out. Let's pause it right here and step you back through the next couple of days, which I think are quite critical. Monday afternoon and evening. So the frontal boundary stalls here. You can see the storms from parts of the Carolinas all the way up to West Virginia, stretching back into Missouri, and then it's going to meet up with that shortwave that brings the severe weather chances right here into the high plains of the Dakotas and maybe parts of Nebraska later on this afternoon, this evening. As we get into the overnight hours, this is where we're going to watch the storms. This again is this evening, moving in through this area, and see if it gets into central and eastern Nebraska by early in the morning. So this will be a critical time period to watch the radar to see how much of this actually materializes as that front slides just ever so slightly to the south. We see that good rains possibly could come into this part of Iowa, and then according to the European model, spread into Illinois and then over into parts around the rest of the Great Lakes states here by overnight hours on Tuesday. Getting into Wednesday morning, if this gets in the eastern Corn Belt, this would be just an incredible rainfall that is desperately needed here. And coming in the morning, that could give us more widespread chances of slower rainfall rather than late afternoon severe storms. This is now Wednesday afternoon and evening. Now getting into early Thursday morning here, you can still see that frontal boundary lingering right in through this area, once again giving chances for showers and storms. As we go from there into Thursday afternoon and evening, you see quite a bit of green in this area indicating storms popping, and we can see the southwestern monsoon going. It will also be by Thursday evening that the pulse coming out of the tropics through the Gulf of Mexico could be moving over toward the coast here in Texas and Louisiana. But as we work our way into the weekend, this is Friday morning, afternoon, and evening. Now getting into Saturday morning, afternoon, and evening, you start to see things drying out in this area, and that's when that larger high-pressure cell begins to move in. Now, as we watch what the upper levels of the atmosphere are going to do here, this is the large ridge that does set up by the time we get into Saturday evening. And that's what's going to be bringing in the heat while broader troughs extend across the western United States and here. If this pattern were to get stuck, in other words, if it wouldn't keep moving, if it wasn't so zonal in its flow, this would give me major concern as we go into the month of August. But it's tending to move. We get out here to day 10, we can now see the ridge backs up to the west a little bit, and still overall zonal flow through the atmosphere. And then as we get out to day 15 here, the ridge is now set up here over the Four Corner states. Northwest flow comes around like this, and that's what ends up giving us this week 2 precipitation pattern. So the GFS ensemble on the left, European over on the right. You can see the monsoon going in both models here. You can see the wetter corridor coming out of the Canadian prairies with continued thunderstorm activity there, moving down on that northwest flow into much of the northern plains of the United States and into the Corn Belt, even into the eastern Corn Belt, which is what the current models are suggesting. And even though the GFS is drier in through here, given its more highly amplified ridge, the European model is a bit more generous with the rainfall down south and also into the plains. And that's partly due to the difference in averaging 51 members in an ensemble and 20. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this pattern as we get out to this point in the month of August. Now let's talk temperatures as we move our way toward the end of this video. You can see the influence of the frontal boundary, keeping much of this section of the U.S. on the cooler side of things, while the Northeast has a very hot day today, really up the I-95 corridor. Playing this forward, let's pause it right here. This is Tuesday's high temperatures and departure from normal. So temporary heat builds up into the west coast while it's cooler here in the central part of the United States and warm east. But as we work our way into Wednesday, now into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, you now see the pattern adjusting. More troughing in the west, so near average to cooler than average weather here, and all the heat comes back into the midsection of the United States toward the Great Lakes. The cooler weather you see down in Texas, this is primarily due to cloud cover and potential precipitation coming from the tropical wave that's coming through the Gulf of Mexico. And it's amazing to say, but 101 degrees for Phoenix on Saturday is cooler than average down here in the southwestern United States. And that continues into the day on Sunday. Beyond that, let's go look at the model agreement out to the 6 to 10 day time period. Both the GFS and the European model are painting a very similar picture with 3 to 10 degrees above average temperatures in this area, while parts of the southern plains down here in Texas get a break from their extreme heat due to that moisture coming in from the tropical kind of pulse coming through the Gulf of Mexico, and the west goes back over to normal temperatures for this time at the end of July. Working our way now into August, we can see that it looks to be a pretty warm first week of August at this point, but I'm calling into question some of the longer range forecasts for August, and this is one of the reasons why. I watched 5 separate model runs from a model called the CFS-V2 that continued to paint right here in this section of the United States a break. Middle of August, maybe like the 9th through the 15th with some cooler weather coming in. But then last night's model run completely flipped on this, sending that colder weather back to the west. I say colder, this is cooler than average. And once again letting heat build into this section of the United States. I still think that because of these major moving features right now, especially in the tropics, like the MJO possibly dislodging coming out of its standing wave over Africa, we've actually seen the Southern Oscillation Index move positive, which could give us more of a La Nina look in the flow of the atmosphere. And we're seeing changes in where atmospheric angular momentum is both losing momentum and gaining it. So in my Wednesday long-range outlook, we're going to be addressing these things as we look out through the month of August and beyond. And we'll certainly keep you updated on both the European model and the CFS-V2 as to what they're looking at for the month of August. I want to finish up with a quick bit of international stuff here. First, since the majority of the people that watch my videos do farm corn, I want to talk about corn production in China. And I specifically want to talk about these growing areas to the south of Beijing. So those two provinces, when you combine them, 15 to 20% of total corn production. Why we discuss this is, as we've been talking about now for about a month, the Mayu front has been parked in this area and in some places has given an additional 10 plus inches of rainfall, some places much more than that. And you've seen a lot of the videos over the weekend, I'm sure, and last week of the flooding that's happening. Something that happened in 1993 in the United States on the Mississippi is now happening on the major river systems in China. They're blowing out their levee systems to let the water flood the fields to prevent damage in the cities. And we know what that did in 93 in the US. Well, it's happening right now in this part of China. The northern growing areas, it's a bit more hit or miss on where the precipitation has been here by looking at the CPC gauge data. And finally, I need to give you an update on the Locust. This was a video that was shot right here east of New Delhi in this part of India. And we continue to see the locust spread across parts of India, still in parts of Africa, of course, but spreading through India as we're waiting on the monsoonal moisture to move farther to the north. Okay, so just a quick promo here. All of this stuff is available at my.nutrienagsolutions.com. And if you want to look at that long-range update, it's right down here. I'll be posting that midweek this week on Wednesday. Okay, hope you all have a great week, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.